So good morning. Glad to be back with you, and especially delighted to be able to introduce you to two friends of mine. This weekend, we're joined by Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin and Imam Abdullah Antepli. Will be with us for this hour, as well as the 11 o'clock service will just be in attendance, but at 12 o'clock, after the lunch at 1 p.m., there's an interfaith panel that Reverend Jensen will lead, and the Imam and the Rabbi will be joined by Minister Liddy Barlow from Christian Associates. That'll be 1 o'clock in the church, and I hope you'll be part of that as well. The topic this morning that we've assigned to our guests, or that they've suggested that they would use, is the Abraham we need today, looking back at our patriarch Abraham. Let me give you just a quick bio by way of introduction of each of our two guests, and then I'll throw it to them. Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, one of my dearest friends, is also one of American Judaism's most prolific and oft-quoted rabbis. His blog, Martini Judaism, for those who want to be shaken and stirred, which is published by the Religion News Service, won in 2022 the Wilbur Award for Best Religion Blog of the Year. His essays have appeared in numerous publications, among them the Washington Post, Tablet, Mosaic, The Forward, Commentary. He's written books, many of them, and numerous articles, and he currently serves as the Rabbi of Temple Israel in West Palm Beach, Florida. His compatriot, Imam Abdullah Antepli, is globally acknowledged leader in interreligious dialogue. He directs with Yossi Klein Halevi the Shalom Hartman Institute's Muslim Leadership Initiative that's in Jerusalem. He was born in Turkey, served as Duke University's first Muslim chaplain, as the director of the Center for Muslim Life, and teaches at Duke's Sanford School of Public Policy and their Divinity School. The nonprofit Times recognized Imam Antepli as one of their power and influence top 50 leaders of 2019, calling him one of the most prominent Muslim leaders in higher education today. Abdullah, we're delighted you're here. Jeff, we're delighted you're here, and we're looking forward to learning with you. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Good morning. It really is a privilege to be here today and tomorrow, and to start with words of praise for this endeavor that brings us together. This very unusual sacred partnership in which this community of faith is committed to building bridges between the Jewish community, the Christian community, the Muslim community, the entire community of faith here in Pittsburgh, is a national model. And so I thank Reverend Jensen for his hospitality, my dear friend Rabbi Aaron Bisno for bringing us here, and for his confidence in the two of us, and my spiritual brother in faith, Imam Antepli. The Abraham we need today starts with the following understanding. There is in science the idea of the fractal. I see some of you nodding your heads. The idea of the fractal is that something small can contain within it the image of something much larger. So in the pattern of the leaf, we see the tree. In the pebble, we see the mountain. In the cell, there is the body. Since I never did well in science, that is obviously a radical simplification of a complex idea. But that's the point. The fractal is a shrinking of something large into something small, wherein you can see that which is large. So I'm going to ask you all to expand that and to understand the fact that when I speak as a rabbi, when I speak as a Jew, when I speak as an educator, I bring to the conversation an idea that the ancient rabbis taught, which is rather cunning and sophisticated. without giving you the original Hebrew citation, they said that everything that the patriarchs, and we would now say the matriarchs, did becomes a blueprint for their descendants. In other words, if you read the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, just those stories in Genesis, the beginning, as it were, the leaf, the cell, that throughout the generations, Jews, and let us now say others, would repeat those patterns. In the same way as a pious Christian would look at the life of Jesus of Nazareth and say, that's the way I want to live my life. It's the stories of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, by the way, even more than Moses, that forms that for us. So when I think of Abraham, and when I think of what Abraham means to the Jewish people, well, there isn't enough time. I don't have enough words. I lack the oxygen. But there are three models of Abraham that I'm going to place before you today that are Jewish models that I'm going to ask you to consider in terms of your own journeys of faith. Two stories and then a third. The first story is the story of Abraham confronting God at Sodom and Gomorrah, in which Abraham stands up to God's decree, God's decision to destroy the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, who, let the record note, they had it coming, and says, will not the judge of all the earth do justice? There is a Hebrew word for this that becomes a Yiddish word for this, which has crept into the English language. The word for that is chutzpah. In Hebrew, chutzpah actually means exactly what Abraham did, audacity, standing up to God. In the Yiddish version, chutzpah is just gall. You didn't call your grandmother? That's chutzpah. You stood up to God? That's chutzpah. And so my teacher, the late Rabbi David Hartman, says that when Abraham stands up to God and questions God's morality, Abraham stands as an autonomous figure before God and therefore symbolizes the ability of the human being to struggle with God, which is the essence of human dignity. So Rabbi Hartman's Abraham is the Abraham who stands up to God and who struggles with God. And by the way, that is an Abraham who resonates through the ages. In fact, I dare say that of the three Abrahamic faiths, as it were, the one that really encapsulates struggling with God is the faith and the people that I've inherited. We have a tradition of being angry with God. There's again a Yiddish proverb that says that if God lived in our neighborhood, we'd throw stones through his windows. Only a Jew would say this. I don't know that we find that in Christianity, and I'm willing to bet, inshallah, you would not find that in Islam. I mean, there's a reason why my people is called Yisrael, the people who wrestle with God. That's what we do. And Abraham taught us. On the other hand, there's a second Abraham 3 chapters later in Genesis. And that's the Abraham that is preferred by the modern Israeli thinker Yeshayahu Leibovitz, one of the great intellectual cranks of modern Jewish history. I say that lovingly. Whose critique of Israeli society has become painfully relevant to many Jews in Israel and diaspora over the last few months, so much so that there is a Facebook meme going around Israel of Leibovitz in which he said in Hebrew, I warned you about what happens when a state becomes so enamored of its religious identity that it starts to trample. And Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik also loved this version of Abraham. And that's the Abraham who is ready and willing to sacrifice his own son on Mount Moriah, the binding of Isaac, which, by the way, fun fact, with the exception of the crucifixion itself, is the most depicted scene in all of Western art. That's how powerful it is. That's the Abraham who submits to God's authority. David Hartman's Abraham stands up to God. Yeshayahu Leibovitz, Soloveitchik's Abraham, submits to God. The Abraham of faith, therefore, is a two-faced Abraham, not hypocritical, but bilateral, as it were. To be a person of faith is to, yes, stand up for justice, but also to submit or to surrender to God. And I suspect that anyone of faith in this room would live with those two Abrahams within them. There's a third Abraham that is mine. This is the Salkin Abraham. That is the Abraham who we find in the text, in the very beginning, to whom God says, while his name is still Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladecha u'mibeit avicha, go forth from your native land and from your father's house. This is the Abraham who hears God saying, you must not only leave your past, fun paradox. A religious faith based on tradition and based on this mania about passing that tradition on to our children comes to us first from a man who breaks with his past and his father. I like that paradox. It's a good one. But who must hear God saying, I want you to leave your society. I want you to leave the most sophisticated city of your time. Ur was Paris, New York, and Pittsburgh rolled into one. Leave that society. You must break with that society. It is the most profoundly conformist city of its time. You must leave there, and you must become a rebel. That's the Salkin Abraham. That's the Abraham I wrote about in my book, The Gods Are Broken, The Hidden Legacy of Abraham. And so I end this photograph of Abraham for you by saying that the Abraham we need today is the Abraham of faith. But the Abraham of faith means standing up to God, submitting to God, but also breaking with our society and being able to say that some things are just simply wrong. I end with the following story. Mrs. Goldberg's son, Jonathan, decides that he wants to enroll in an officer training program, and so he decides to go to Fort Benning, Georgia. And he calls his mother and says, Mom, I'm graduating. I'd like you and your friends to come down and come to the graduating ceremony. And they take the bus down, and they're sitting in the stands, and his squad comes out, and they look gorgeous. They're all like dressed in white. And the entire squad is going to the reviewing stand, and they're all marching there, and they all salute the generals who are there. And Jonathan is walking this way and saluting no one. Mrs. Goldberg turns to her friends, and she says, oh, this is so wonderful. I'm so proud of him. He's the only one who's getting it right. My friends, I will say to you, that what we people of faith have in common, you know what I'm going to say is, we listen to different drummers. We don't pay attention to the majority voices, sometimes even within our own faiths itself. It's such a joy. If I can teach you a Yiddish word, I get such nachas, such joy and inner satisfaction out of being here with all of you these next 2 days, to be with my friends and colleagues and with our hosts. And I again commend you on what you are building in this city. This is truly the work of God. Thank you very much.
I have my own. Good morning, Calvary. Good morning. I have my own.
You have your own.
Yeah. It is such a distinct pleasure and honor to be here. I told Reverend Johnson that Pittsburgh is the first city I lived in the United States. I'm Turkish. That's why the Duke students call me a Turkish delight imam. And I lived in many different parts of the world. I came to University of Pittsburgh for one semester in 1998. That's where I fell in love with the United States. That's where I decided to come back and become an American Muslim and bought into this American idea, this experiment, which I am so proud and passionate, but also because of that love and commitment and passion, and very, very critical as well. So it all started here. You can blame the Pittsburgh. And that's why I'm always a Steelers fan, wherever I go. So I am deeply moved by what I hear about this community. It's in the Quran as well as in the Torah that houses of worship should be a house of prayer for many. And we haven't been practicing this mission of inclusivity, respecting our particularisms, respecting our boundaries, but opening up space in our hearts and minds, first of all, and by extension, in our houses of worship. When I found out that this community hosting a rabbi, Ethiopian Orthodox Christian community, all you are missing is a group of Muslims and Hindus, just to complete the circle. This is a remarkable picture, which I hope will be amplified and also be seen other as well. And it's a very good transition to the topic of Abraham. In addition to these 3 pictures of Abraham, 3 different images of Abraham, I would like to add 3 more. So in the remaining 10 minutes, so that we can engage with you. Who is this Abraham? And in what ways, in the 21st century, where we are, where we face all these monumental challenges and even many more opportunities, revisiting the image of Abraham, reimagining the mission and legacy of Abraham, reactivating some of the religious, spiritual, ethical, moral technologies that this Abraham has generated many thousand years ago that could give us the kind of ethical, moral motivation to not only solve problem, but glorifying God's name. The opportunities that the children and descendants of Abraham can display and model, empower and inspire humanity to reveal the best of itself and tame and discipline and domesticate the worst of itself. Is it possible? In addition to its 3 remarkable images, I want to offer 3 images somewhat specifically from the Muslim tradition or Islamic tradition. The place where Abraham was finally put to rest, Hebron in Hebrew, is called Al-Khalil, the place where God's friend resides. When contemporary Jews, Christians, and Muslims were debating whether Abraham was a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, God revealed to Prophet Muhammad another verse from the Holy Quran. It's so beautiful. Are they debating whether Abraham was a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim? How silly is this? How silly that they are fighting about a religious identity and trying to box Abraham, confine Abraham, reduce Abraham into a team membership. How silly that is. That central figure was supposed to bring you all together. And God says and names God, as God named Avram into Abraham in the Torah. God gives an honorific title to Abraham. Abraham in the Quran, I'm not going to bore you with the Arabic version, was neither a Jew, nor a Christian, nor a Muslim. And says Abraham was Khalilullah. Abraham was an intimate friend of God. Abraham was an intimate friend. And anybody who speaks or studies Semitic languages, like one word means million things. And the friendship that Khalil or Khila represents is the level of intimacy beyond any romance, beyond any worldly love and you can imagine. A friend that walks a journey with you. A friend sacrifices for you. A friend doesn't mind being the misfit, the famous Quranic and the biblical picture of Abraham, where he is on one side of the river because of that friendship to God, and everybody else is on the other side of the river. And he is willing to be alone. He is willing to be the rebel. He is willing to reject and be the misfit. But at the end, if you can become the friend of God, at the end, who remembers the people on the other side of the river? No one. Now, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, which makes about half of humanity, remembers, honors, and uplifts Abraham. If you can become Abraham, if you can go back to the roots beyond your religious identities, those religious identities and particularisms matter. Being a good Jew, Christian, and Muslims matter, as long as it effectively makes you intimate with God, intimate friend with God. It sort of becomes Abrahamic in that sense, that it elevates you. All the rituals, particularisms, we don't need to flatten them out. We need to invest more in them. We should try to be a better Jew, better Christian, better Muslim in the particular traditions that's being given to us, in this case, Episcopalianism. But end result, we have to keep the eye on the prize. Being a Khalil, being a friend, that ultimate goal is not lost. Rumi, the famous mystic from the 12th century, Abraham in so many ways was a pointer. This is the last thing I will say about him being a friend and very intimate friend of God. Rumi says, Abraham pointed out to the sun, and we fools got lost in his finger. We didn't look at what it's pointing out. So can we use our Abraham, Jewish Abraham, Christian Abraham, Episcopalian Abraham, Sunni Abraham, Shia Abraham, in a way that we can look into what Abraham points out for us and invest in that mechanism so we also can individually and collectively become friend of God. We could be claiming that intimacy, and through that we can see the presence of God in our life, and through that energy we can solve all the monumental ethical moral problems that we are facing. The second Abraham is not an individual. When you think of Abraham, when you close your eyes and think of Abraham, if you only see an old man, again, you are missing the point. Abraham was part of a collective. Abraham was a story of a family with Sarah, with Hagar, with Ishmael. Leadership often represents a collective. I think in so many ways we did such a disservice as Jews, Christians, and Muslims by silencing and flattening other characters and their role in the story, especially women. Especially those women who some of them were African slaves, who came from underrepresented and marginalized communities and societies. By putting one person and breaking that person's relationship from the collective reality that it represents, we did such a disservice. Why, if we think critically, our Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is not making us ultimately as intimate friend of God. I think one place we might look into what went wrong, we turned this whole story into one charismatic leader at the center of everything and everybody. And we missed the rest of the story. We missed that collective identity. So as we reimagine Abraham in 2023, in the 21st century, as we want to reactivate potential spiritual pleasures, ethical, moral imaginations in this story, can we reactivate and lift up some of the stories that is forgotten, neglected, at best, intentionally silenced, deleted, and omitted at worst, which we have many examples of, and in this category I can say more, but my time management is getting bad, so let me just quicken up. I am an imam. I've been living in North Carolina for the last 15 years, but whenever I speak, North Carolinians says, "Are you really an imam?" I said, "Yes." But when they see me talk and preach, they say, "No, there's a Southern Baptist preacher in you." There is a Southern Baptist preacher in you, just throwing yourself out there. So I hear the inclination of that Southern Baptist preacher. I'm not going to go there. The third Abraham that I want to bring up to you is I think we turn Abraham so regretfully, in my mind, into this tribal leader and create imaginative hierarchies within that family and beyond that family. So when Jews, Christians, and Muslims always say we are spiritual brothers, our common father Abraham, we are Abrahamic family and Abrahamic religion. I always wonder if Hindus, Buddhists look into this Abrahamic family and say, boy, what a dysfunctional family. Rightfully so. Rightfully so. I think the way we claimed Abraham, the way we turned Abraham into this almost a very exclusionary reality, and within that, following the descendancy of Abraham, Abraham was supposed to create unity, solidarity within its own family. Abraham was promised if he puts up all these sacrifices, sacrifice after sacrifice, test after test, that he will have many descendants. And those descendants was going to be one family. And those descendants was going to be a light unto other nations, was going to reflect and display and exemplify a collective reality that was going to inspire the rest of the humanity. And in some places, in some small measures, that happened. But it's very hard to say. It's very hard to imagine today that reality, not only Abraham as a unifying factor within its own family, with its own descendants. Muslims argue that it was through Ishmael. The Jews says it was through Isaac. Christians say even through this and that. We turn this as a divisive reality. And by that, we did such a huge disservice in so many places in our history. But as we visit, now, no need to beat the dead horse of the past. But as we are discussing, the Abraham that unites with its all collective reality, with all the members of his own family, equal value, can activate our religious imagination in such a way that not only brings Christians, Jews, and Muslims together, but also extends a humanity to the rest of the people as well. That is my hope. We have given you 6 pictures of Abraham, and I hope we have at least opened and expanded some of the thinking about this incredible patriarch and all the matriarch within his family. And we are looking forward to engaging with you with all these questions. Thank you very much. Are we supposed to be up here? Yeah, come on. It's hard to stand next to these tall rabbis. But I do get a better chance in flying economy. I was feeling always complicated about my height, but once I travel economy, these guys are suffering, I'm not.
Sometimes when I go to speak in places, they say to me, Jeff, please be short. It's too late.
Yes.
Well, so we've been studying the parables and how the images that are created there, what Judaism can say about them or see them together. Share with us a little bit about just the significance of Abraham in Jewish tradition and in Muslim tradition to help us get an insight into what this personage represents, what we're looking for today. Right?
Sure.
I think much of what I would say would be a continuation of what Abdullah has said. For me, what is most important about Abraham is that Abraham is the founder of the Jewish people. And the image that Abdullah raised of the man who stands on one side of the river and the world is on the other side, the oppositional Abraham, as you've already heard, that Abraham looms large in my consciousness. So Abraham is the founder of the Jewish people. Moses is traditionally the founder of the Jewish religion, and King David, the founder of the Jewish nation. And those are the 3 pieces, as it were, I don't want to say the Trinity. I don't want to vulgarize that image or trounce your hospitality. But Abraham is the rock from whom we were hewn. He is the not the moral exemplar, by no means, by the way, but certainly the progenitor. The struggles that he goes through, the journeys that he goes through, are in fact absolutely crucial to a Jewish understanding of the Jewish role in the world. And by the way, in that sense, I think Abraham is more important than Moses and David, because no one ever points to Moses and David as a way of understanding Jewish, watch this, foreign policy. In other words, how we relate to being in the world is the genetic and spiritual inheritance of Abraham, much less that of Moses and of David.
I would say with no hesitation, Muslims wouldn't agree on the day of the week. If you ask 1.7 billion people, they wouldn't agree that it's Sunday. But I think most Muslims would agree that Abraham and his story and his family, in the collective sense, is more important than Muhammad by far. Let me walk you through some of the central symbols of Islam. Kaaba, Mecca. Muhammad was the direct descendant of Ishmael. And what happened to Hagar and Ishmael after they were kicked out of the house of Sarah in the Judeo-Christian version of the story is not known. But for us, that's where the story starts, as Muslims. They weren't fighting. It wasn't because of the two women fighting in the house. It was another form of test of God of Abraham taking his older son Ishmael and his mother Hagar to Mecca and leave them there as a sign of obedience. And again, when they established themselves, Abraham went back and forth between Jerusalem and Mecca and visited Hagar and Ishmael. And in one of those moments, God ordered Abraham to sacrifice Ishmael according to Islamic tradition. In one other instance of testing Abraham's faith, God said when Ishmael became a teenager, saying, build me a house of worship. Build me a house of monotheism. And Abraham, as usual, rebelled against God, questioned God. You keep testing my faith. You ask me to bring my wife and my son over here, my oldest son over here, sacrifice him. Is it not enough? Now you want me to build a house of worship? The Kaaba, that black square. Who will come here? Who will worship? What difference does it make? And then God says, build me a house of worship, and my people will respond to my invitation to prayer. And today, 1.8 billion Muslims, 5 times a day, we turn towards that place. 5 times a day, not once a year, once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime, we go there to honor that invitation of God through Abraham. But for believing, practicing Muslims everywhere, they turn their face from wherever they are. If they are in Malaysia, towards west. If they are in United States, towards northeast. 5 times a day, especially in a holy month like Ramadan, with much more intention, much more intentionality, honoring that Abraham's relationship, that friendship. And as a result of we all were born, turning their face in that direction and praying. The second symbol of Islam is Jerusalem. In addition to Mecca and Medina, which is all about Abraham's story. If you look what we do when we go to Mecca for Hajj, for pilgrimage, every step is walking in the steps of Hagar, Ishmael, and Abraham. So it's a very central story. If you pull Abraham and Abraham's story out of Islam, nothing is left. And if you look at Jerusalem, its importance in Islam, why that Aqsa is an important place, what happened there is again another version of Islam's deep connection to Abraham as well. Thank you, Rabbi Aaron, for that important, so we can put more factual information on the table. But let's engage with you. This is Sunday morning, coffee is still not working. So we want to engage with your question other than we preaching at you or talking at you. All right, who would like to start? Please, you recognize the questions.
Sure, if there is one. Let me say that the comfort, I think part of what we're meeting with, the comfort that Judaism has, and it seems that Islam enjoys also, with being able to look at different aspects of a personality or a person, or to read into a biblical character like Abraham, sort of a psychological profile or a deconstruct personality. My sense is that's not as familiar in the Christian hermeneutic. The idea of midrash, right? We talk about midrash, sort of rabbinic fan fiction, right? What precipitated Abraham's decision to leave his father's house? What was the conversation between Abraham and Isaac on the way up or back down the mountain? That's a background, a Jewish way of reading the text. So you could describe Abraham in these 6 different ways, and at different times, a different aspect of Abraham will be appropriate or relevant.
Sure.
But I don't know that tradition exists quite in the Christian vernacular or idiom, where we can look at a different, the Jesus of this quality versus that quality, right? Which one do we need now? That may be part of what's going on here. I wonder if the relationship that Christianity has with Islam informs whether Judaism or Islam is in dialogue with that, or with Judaism and Islam one with another. The way in which our traditions inform each other. One of the things we've taken from the parables class Reverend Jensen and I, is he'll describe the fact that the insights that my Yo-Yo Ma describes that when you want to look at something in a new way, it helps to take beginner's eyes. Right, to look at, I actually done an article, I took out the journal from last week for you, a naive reading of the Gospels. It was an article that Nicholas Kristof wrote just before Easter. To look at something as if for the first time, and you take it in a different way than if you've seen it over and over and have not been invited to question it. So
a second naivete would be Paul Report.
A second naivete.
Yeah, or a brilliant newcomer, Bisno.
And reading it through his eyes. Absolutely. We are in the month of Ramadan. I'm not fasting because when you travel, you are not supposed to fast. This is a religious requirement as well. But the whole idea of Ramadan is actually to die spiritually. And every Ramadan, we are supposed to read the entire Quran as if we are reading the first time. Because we are the new person. There has been a lot of other events. Something happened that our lenses, our look into the world has changed. COVID came, and we look at the world a whole different way. So what is a post-COVID eyes and reflection and relationship to Quran in general, or Abraham in particular? We have to do this in many ways. Lent, in many ways high holidays, in many ways Pesach, is a similar invitation to develop these naive eyes and look into this tradition or Abraham in a whole brand new way, with new glasses, with new lenses.
For about 5 years, my younger brother and I did not speak because of some mishandled stuff in our family, of which he was totally responsible. But as our 98-year-old father was dying in Florida, and as we were sitting on the two sides of the bed, each of us holding his hand, at that moment I realized that my father was Isaac and that my brother was Esau and that I was Jacob. After my father died, I called my brother and I said, I got 3 words for you. I forgive you. Please come back into my family. We will never speak of this again. And in fact, there's now not a day that we do not speak. But at that moment, I came to understand something. For my entire career, people have asked me, did the stuff in the Torah really happen? Now my response is, we don't know if it really happened. Watch this. But we know that it happens all the time. And so that our lives become a midrash, an exposition of the text. We live the text over and over and over again. And if you think about stuff in your own lives, you'll realize that you've lived pieces of a biblical text in some ways, whether you know it or not. And for me, that's the great gift of reading Scripture. It's not only reading it as if I was reading it for the first time. And the beautiful thing is that as I complete 43 years of being a rabbi in July, and that means 43 years of going through the Torah every single week, what's amazing to me is that I never get bored. What's amazing to me is I always see something new that I'd never experienced before. I can rehear music and say, I'm bored of that piece, and just kind of keep going. But that never happens with a sacred text. And so what we all have in common is that we are children of a text, and that our lives are, in some ways, interpretations of the text. And I'll also go so far as to say, and I cannot speak accurately of Islam in this particular way, but
I would correct you. Go ahead.
But in many ways, Judaism and Christianity are sibling midrashim. They are sibling interpretations of the biblical inheritance. And that for a long time we had to fight each other to figure out who was right. And that turned out to be a rather adolescent battle. I think that what we now experience with the three Abrahamic faiths is the possibility of the paradox of, I believe in my people's path and I walk my people's path. But you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. I shared an image with my colleagues moments ago. Forrester Church, who was a Unitarian minister, the late son of the also late Senator Frank Church, said we all stand in the cathedral of the world, and we stand with our tribes, and we stand near the stained glass window that is appropriate for our people, and the light of God comes through the window and it's refracted through that stained glass window. He said, relativists will say, it doesn't matter where I stand, the light's the same. Fundamentalists will say, the light only shines through my window. Fanatics will say, and not only that, but I'm going to break your window. The dignity and the grace is, how do I stand near my window and have the freedom and even the playfulness to take a walk over to your window and see what the light feels like from there, but knowing that I still have a home base. That's the deal.
I was talking, you glossed over very quickly, you made reference to the fact that Abraham is not a moral exemplar, far from it, right?
Right.
That you haven't enumerated, but in the story of Abraham, in the book of Genesis, Abraham behaves at various moments in ways that are very hard to either understand or to defend. Now, the same thing can be said of King David, and the same thing can be said of Moses. And that's not discomforting within the Jewish tradition. But we live today in an age, as we know, that if you transgress in certain ways that you may not have even appreciated you had done, you may find yourself very quickly on the outside of a group, or you may be castigated or stigmatized, right? You know the long arm of cancel culture in that way. Can each of you give us some insight of how it is that we understand Abraham to be a role model in spite of these various foibles or failings? How do we redeem a character like Abraham without just glossing over what we would like to otherwise ignore? And what model can that give us today when anyone could find themselves, any one of our friends could find themselves on the outs? What can we take from the Abrahamic story?
First of all, Muslims took the cheap route, as you know. Those problematic elements of Abraham doesn't exist in Islamic tradition. So we Muslimize and Islamicize everybody. I'll tell you a very quick story. My second child, we found out that he was going to be a boy. And all my life, I've been working to bring peace to the house of Abraham. I thought we should give him a name that will be honored by the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. We should find out a way that this name, and hopefully he will live up to that legacy, will be revered and respected in all Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And my wife and I, we like David. It's a beautiful name. And then my in-law said, sure, yes, Prophet David. He's a prophet to us. This obedient, pious, with beautiful voice. Not only he was a commander, but he was also singing praise of God. But they rightfully said, if this is your intention, who is the Jewish David? Who is the Jewish and Christian David? And with the help of internet, they found out about Bathsheba and all that shenanigans and etc. They came and said, you are not naming my grandson David. So we went into this dance of a very unique intra-Abrahamic family. How do we remember these stories? In a sanitized, sanctified version of the Islamic version of the story, with all the problematics of the Jewish and Christian. We wanted Abraham, but then again the stories came up. Solomon. So we named my son Jacob because he only lied once. Like that was one. At least I was able to convince my in-laws that he is, because in the Muslim imagination of these names, the only person that fits the Muslim understanding of a prophet is Jesus. Because every of these characters, and we could have easily named him Jesus, and Jesus is a very central figure in Islam. He's the most repeated person in the Quran. Virgin Mary, but that would exclude Judaism. So I wanted to include all three branches of this. But the image of Jesus as sinless, pure, as an active role model is the image of all single prophets. We sort of retold their stories in a way. And I'll pass on to, because your question is more relevant in the Judeo-Christian context. Even for a Muslim to think that these prophets have committed any major sins or they had moral flaws is theologically problematic. But what I ended up realizing, these two different versions of these names, including Abraham, is two different pieces of the puzzle. Instead of just buying purely sanitized, purified version of the Muslim, or just getting lost in some of the problematic aspects of human flaws in the Judeo-Christian version of the story, is there a way these two same people, there is no doubt, they are talking about the same people, can be two different pieces of the puzzle, and we can bring it together is my challenge. Jacob is a freshman and trying to live up to his name.
It's funny you say this because when my second son was born, we named him Gabriel for specifically the same reason, because Gabriel is the only angel who appears simultaneously in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic lore,
Right.
where he shows up as Jibril. And so we did that as a testimony to the possibility of the children of Abraham living together in peace. And he's getting married in October. I'll tell you all where they're registered so you can. The paradox of living with these failed figures, someone once said, there's no one in the Hebrew Bible you'd want your kid to grow up to be like. That's actually not true. My two favorite characters in the entire Bible are Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, who is considered a saint by the Druze sect in Israel and in Syria and in Lebanon, and Mordecai in the story of Esther. These are really good people. But when we deal with the legacy of Abraham, the problematic legacy, the basically sending forth Ishmael into the wilderness in what was essentially an act of homicide, and then a chapter later almost sacrificing Isaac. This is not exactly someone who's going to be receiving Father's Day cards. Let me take again a mischievous and playful idea here and say that my understanding of why we keep these people in our stories, why we haven't canceled Abraham, why we haven't canceled Jacob, why we haven't canceled Moses, who had a bit of an anger management issue, Saul, a broken man, Solomon, an egomaniac. We go through it all. Is that in some sense, to accept their flaws and to accept them as part of the story means that, again, the scientific idea of the fractal, they are the fractals of us, which is that when we accept their imperfections as part of the scroll, we accept our imperfections as part of our own personal stories. And that's very important for us as people of faith. And that's why we don't cancel them. That's why we don't get rid of them. That's why we do not sanitize these stories. We teach them, and we don't apologize for them. They are, in a Jungian sense even, they are, in a mystical sense, they are aspects of our own personalities, even the parts of us that we would like to reject. And that's why we keep them within the narrative.
It reminds me of this famous Native American narrative. A Native American chief leader invites these teenagers. They are about to be adults. They are about to take leadership in the tribe, and says, in each and every single one of you, there is an evil wolf and a good wolf. And they are constantly fighting. They are constantly fighting. And then, of course, the teenagers ask, which wolf will win at the end? If there is an evil wolf and good wolf in me, which one will prevail? And the chief famously says, whichever you feed, whichever you empower, whichever you nurture, whichever you give power to. So in many ways, you're absolutely right. These stories represent the good, the bad, and ugly of humanity. As there is a good, and that's why maybe a little bit more good wolf in the Islamic tradition, in version of the story, and maybe some of the, not evil, but problematic aspects of the wolf They are each and every one of us. Can we learn which one to feed more and which one to control more?
I'll also say this. Many secularists who I encounter love to cherry pick these stories and love to throw them out and say, you see, that's why religion is so evil. And here's what I've come to tell you. I come to tell you that when you hear that, you have to be able to respond and say, it depends on what, not only what you feed, which is really interesting, because you could say, as the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the late chief rabbi of Great Britain, said, religion makes good people better and makes bad people worse. I think that's true. We see this in the world today. But I think what we have to be able to say is it depends on what you see. You see, if you are a person who believes that religion is essentially a public good, then you're going to see the public good in these stories. If you believe that religion is evil, you're going to see the evil stuff in all of these stories. It is a prism, it is a Rorschach through which we view reality. And I choose, when I look at religion today, I know that I have a choice. I have a choice to see the evil that goes on, or I have a choice to see the saintly that goes on. For example, because I believe that it's always a cheap shot to criticize another faith community, I actually believe in what my teacher, Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, the great modern Orthodox rabbi, said, which is that before you criticize another faith, you should always criticize your own first. I start with that. Call it, maybe it's even a little masochistic of me. But so, for example, many people are shocked, horrified, and saddened to have read the New York Times expose of something that we've known for a long time, which is the abysmal educational standards that have taken place in the Hasidic communities in New York, in upstate New York, and the misuse of public funds. It's a scandal. It's terrible. And people of my own faith say, you see, these people are criminals, they're terrible, they're terrible. And I said, but you know something? Do you know why there's no poverty in those communities? There's no poverty in those communities because people take care of each other. People don't go on welfare. They take food stamps, which, by the way, is their right. By the way, so is welfare. But the community itself supports its poor. I said, but when you criticize a community, also look at the saintly stuff that's going on within those communities. You want to look at what evangelical Christians are doing in the political realm? Well, you and I, we could make our own horror list there, but I also know that they're feeding the hungry. So we have to be able to, and I wouldn't even dare to talk about the Muslim community. We have to be able to, in Hebrew it's called hakarat hatov, to recognize the good that is within each faith community.
Great. I'm going to amplify your comments, both of you, from Yitzhak Greenberg. Yitzhak Greenberg says that it doesn't matter what faith tradition you're part of as long as you're ashamed of it.
Only a Jew can say this.
But he cautions that it's very easy to say positive things about your own group, your own religious group, your own political group, right? Your own. That's easy. And it's easy to criticize someone else and see what's wrong with them. The trick, however, is to be able to identify what you admire in the other's thoughts or practices or way of life, and to appreciate the ways in which your own falls short or could be better, right? We have what to learn from each other, which is both looking at which one we feed or what aspect we're looking for, right? We know the story about the two travelers who return and say that everyone there is mean and crotchety, and the other person, everyone there is wonderfully generous and friendly, and it turns out that these are the way these two individuals see everything they go into, right? They always find the fault, or they're always finding the silver lining. John and I, in building this class and this program, have emphasized or leaned into the idea that the other doesn't have to be wrong in order for me to be right, right? And that these truths can be held simultaneously.
Exactly.
Good. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.